This is an uncategorized video, the topic of which is continued analysis of the idea, the assertion, that units do not break in combat. So it is my intent to continue analysis of this idea by breaking it down into its constituent parts and as methodically as possible examine those parts and the structure of this statement so that in the end a fuller explanation is provided. Related to the idea, the assertion that units do not break in combat, is the idea that wargame designers may apply a concept or mechanic from one level of war to another level of war where it does not so aptly fit. So, at least in my mind, these two go together. But back to units do not break in combat. Okay. I readily admit, and I say up front, that the phrase "units do not break in combat" is meant to be attention-getting. It's meant to be attention-getting because I can imagine a longtime wargamer insisting that seemingly every war game he has ever played has units breaking. And so how can I possibly say units don't break in combat? So if the phrase units don't break in combat sounds absurd, then I guess I've served my purpose of suggesting that I have something more to say about this. It's one way to put it. Okay, so units. I am talking about small unit. I'm talking about combat actions. And I guess I should clarify better here. Battalions, I can see breaking. Brigades, regiments, I can see breaking. Divisions, corps, armies, I can see breaking. That is not difficult for me to accept. Below battalion level, it starts to get harder and harder for me to accept this idea of units breaking in combat. And when it gets down to squad and team levels, let alone individual soldier level, I don't see it. I don't believe it. And perhaps someone might ask, what's the difference? Perhaps someone might ask, well, wait a minute, if an army breaks and a division breaks and a battalion breaks, shouldn't it follow that a squad breaks and a fire team breaks? Not really. War at these levels is different. And one of the most important aspects, one of the most important variables, certainly not the only variable, but one of the most important variables, and maybe I shouldn't use that word here, but one of the most important variables that is changing as you're moving from one echelon or level to another is your typical or average time scale. And that makes all the difference. That time makes all the difference. While I have said that units do not break in combat, accepting, of course, that that's meant to be, the phrase is meant to be contentious. While I say this, I also say that if a unit breaks, if a small unit breaks, it will break between combat, or essentially after combat. This is a straightforward assertion, which is why when you talk about a longer time scale, larger time scale, you can talk about larger units breaking because you are essentially talking about cycles of combat and periods between combat. Okay. So units is small units, really talking squads and teams, to put it simply. Platoons and companies are perhaps borderline. Depends on the context. Okay, so that's units. I say don't break because, of course, I'm talking, or if it's not obvious, let me clarify that I'm talking about what is, what is typical. Breaking, of course, can mean different things for sure, but to me, breaking is basically a collapse of morale. And morale, by the way, is not just a feeling. Morale is a combination of faith and confidence in one's own abilities, equipment, leadership, judgment. Okay. So maybe a question to ask is where I would even come up with this idea. Why? Why is a whole nother discussion. But where? First and foremost is personal experience. In no particular order. My experience in Iraq as a platoon leader in a infantry battalion, 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division. 126 Battalion in 2004 had first of all, the battalion had a very difficult deployment. It was challenging. The battalion took heavy casualties. And definitely on top of that, because that alone We're talking about an infantry battalion. That alone, if you want to talk in game terms, you want to roll your 6-sided die, that would not lead to the battalion breaking. But the battalion, on top of what I've said, the battalion had a very bad day. Yeah, just about halfway through the deployment, the battalion had a mass casualty event, which led to a extended battle with insurgents in the city, which precipitated several weeks later, or was it days? No, I think it was weeks later, a major operation to essentially wrest control of Samara back from insurgents. So the point here being that the mass casualty event, we're talking real world here, that was, if you want to zoom this way out to the entire war in Iraq, and my battalion is one tiny little chit on the map. This period, this mass cal event, the fighting that it basically led directly to, would be a, maybe in game terms it would be a break, maybe. Certainly it would be a, what's halfway to breaking in war game terms, a shaken, maybe. Shaken. It's at least shaken, if not all the way to broken. So what I'm saying is, I have for myself the personal, tangible, visceral definition of what breaking is. Certainly for an infantry battalion in a whole, campaign, multi-year, campaign, countrywide, so on and so forth. Now, of course, game designers can do whatever they want with the term. They can define it however they want in mechanical terms. A game is a model is a model. But I'm not really talking about a model. I'm talking about the reality. Okay, so to circle back around again, units don't break in combat. What I'm saying is my battalion, one chit in one hex of a whole big, huge map sheet of Iraq, when the player rolls the dice and puts a shaken marker or broken marker on top of my battalion, that's not breaking in combat, because I know the soldiers involved, and soldiers don't break in combat. It's after the combat. So the mass cal event led to a long, protracted battle, which then went into a lull, which then precipitated a major operation. So basically, you want to put it back in, you can also think of this in game terms. After the mass cal event and after the extended, many hours long battle, the battalion as a whole was, shaken, broken, something like that. The leadership of the battalion was summarily dismissed replaced. It was the battalion had felt defeat for sure, without a doubt, and on top of that, the morale, this is real morale, had sunk very low. But again, this is after the combat. The dropping morale, rising morale, and by the way, the part, I believe, a reason for the subsequent operation to retake Samara from the insurgents was in part to remove the shaken/broken marker from the battalion. Anyways, I know that in that long protracted battle following the mass casualty event, the soldiers fought with no shakiness, no breakiness, because that's not how soldiers act. That's not how things work. Again, it's morale depresses. Basically, let me put it bluntly, when you're talking battalions and above, even, talking about divisions, it's repeated fighting with setbacks, with periods in between where units can basically have their morale drop that leads to a unit breaking. Now it is true that a battle can, one might point to military history and say, but wait a minute, this army was in this battle, and at the end of the battle, this army was routed. It was in full-fledged retreat. It was fleeing. True. But I would still argue that an army that is fleeing a battlefield is still acting to save itself. And I don't know how else to put it. But in any case, of course, I want to focus on small unit level. I'm not interested in battalion and above, because I'm basically saying that, yes, I can talk about larger units breaking. I was just explaining the much larger context that's involved there. So now let's take it down to the lower level, the small unit level that I want to talk about. As a platoon leader in Iraq, I had a section sergeant. Who was essentially, if you want to put it this way, he was breaking. He had failed his morale check. So if you want to talk about, do individuals have morale? I suppose so. Not sure it's that interesting of a phenomenon, but okay. Can individuals break? Yeah. Again, I suppose so. Again, I'm not sure that's that interesting of a phenomenon, but let's look at this section sergeant, because what happened was this section sergeant, again, failed his morale check, broke. Still, I wouldn't call it breaking, but he certainly was shaken. And I relieved him, and I had him moved, out of the unit, out of the battalion, out of the forward operating base. I had him removed completely. Why? Because, of course, this is not that hard to understand. He was a section sergeant in my platoon. He was spreading poor morale. He was spreading shakiness. But what I want to emphasize is that it was, having watched this leader, go down the road of breaking, it was the periods between actions that shook him. It wasn't the actions themselves. It was the opportunity to dwell on them in between, that ate away at his morale, if you want to put it that way. And so again, using this example, this firsthand example, watching this is what I mean when I say that small units, squads and teams, and yes, individuals, will act in certain ways in combat, driven primarily by self-survival, self-preservation. It is between combat that small units drop in morale and break. So what's going on here? I think that, again, to go back to the related point that I mentioned way at the very beginning, the second related point, I think that the war game designers have taken a concept of, plummeting morale, leading to retreating, leading to routing, leading to breaking. I think war game designers have, over the years, taken this concept that applies at a higher level and plugged it in at the very low small unit level, where it's never fit well for me. I think that's what's happened. So I would rather that game design look at what's really happening with the phenomenon you're looking at. So small unit combat actions. All right, so to kind of wrap up this and transition to a second related idea, or would that be a third related idea? Units don't break in combat. I mean small units, primarily squads and teams. Don't break. Of course, we're talking typically here. Breaking, no. Typically, small units do not break in combat. I haven't even talked about, and it'd be nice if I didn't have to. It'd be nice if I didn't think I had to. Breaking in combat, truly breaking in combat, is suicidal. Yeah. All right. I think that's enough for that. But okay, a related idea. Recent online reading. I was reading a Wargamer's AAR, after action review of certainly a small unit combat action game. This game is essentially, if I understood it correctly, I don't know the game, but It's essentially squad against squad, or maybe a couple of squads against a couple squads, several squads against several squads. Each unit is an individual soldier. And there was a discussion about leaders, orders, and command control. And the mechanic was explained in the AAR as this. There are different leaders. I'm going to guess there was a captain mentioned, and there were other leaders mentioned, so I'm going to assume that there's a captain, and I'm going to assume that there are squad leaders, maybe some other leaders as well. But the discussion was the importance of assigning these leaders in different places. And it was explained that the leaders give cards to the player which represents orders, and that in some way, as leaders are lost, either the player receives less cards, is able to hold less cards, or is able to play less cards, or some combination thereof. But it was clearly explained that as leaders are lost, the number of orders able to be issued goes down, resulting in obviously a far less capable force. And this was explained as a great implementation of command control. Wow. Interesting game. Where do I even begin? First of all, command control at the level of 1, 2, or 3 squads, units as individuals. Command control perhaps exists at this level, perhaps. But I am saying that command control is not really an overt phenomenon at this level. As a matter of fact, I will say that command control is probably so embedded in just the reality of action and communication, that it doesn't exist as a really distinct factor. So building game mechanics for that is interesting. Well, certainly I'm very curious how this is explained. Okay, but the idea of diminishing orders is so, okay, understand the underlying point, and the only point I'm making here, again, is the misapplication of a mechanic and model and concept from one echelon to another echelon. As I thought about it in my mind, the design idea as I got it was that the leaders are issuing orders, and orders are these distinct, they're these distinct things which directly lead to action. And so you have a sender, leader, the message sent, the thing sent, the message, the order, and then you have, I guess, the soldiers who are the receivers who receive the order and then act, but don't act without it. Again, this might be perfectly understandable if we're talking about, a division over in one part of a theater of war and a separate brigade in another part of the theater of war and a reduced corps maybe in another part of the theater of war with the corps commander issuing orders which are more distinct things. They're more understandable. It's more understandable that these orders are distinct things. They're 5 pages of paper, or they're a radio transmission, or their, something, right? Their courier, what a courier does, whatever. It's more understandable that unit, that subordinate unit, would have to receive that thing, that order, from a higher leader to take, substantial, meaningful action. But to take that and to bring it way down, actually to the lowest imaginable level, and to keep it the same is very curious. It's very curious. And to me, it can only create this strange thing at that small unit level. Now, I have to emphasize, to explain my amusement and bewilderment, yes. A lot of this could possibly be explained by design for effect. And actually, I think that, realistically, I think that this was the idea. The idea is not actually, specific leaders, specific number of orders, specific number of actions enabled. It's, well, I'll just say the only justifiable approach I can think of is that, okay, this is designed for effect. This is supposed to be, in general, a unit that, however it's explained by design for effect. But that's the problem. Too much design for effect. I think I'm getting to the point now where I'm saying that if a game has too much design for effect and too little design for cause, it makes it, one, difficult to understand what's really going on and understand in a more meaningful way. Well, basically, if we go to the extreme and we say, well, the game is entirely designed for effect and design for cause is minimized to the utmost, then I do think that the player is truly left in a void, and the player is basically just receiving these effects and isn't really gaining any understanding of what's really going on at a level below, again, the mere effects. And if what you're trying to model is something real world, then I think that you are diminishing the ability to communicate any insight into the real world phenomenon. Okay, so that is essentially what I'm saying. I guess that this leader, order, command control, design thing, probably fun, I guess. Probably one approach, perfectly valid, by the way. Just again, problematic for me according to what I believe, but not for play. Could be perfectly fun to play. Anyways, too much design for effect, so that causes are lost, and most importantly, it's the insight that we can gain through a simulation game is an understanding of the real world cause and effect relationships. So if a game relies too heavily on design for effect, it can lead to problematic presentations of reality, and questionable, frankly. Okay, so I've talked about this idea again. The central idea is just the extent to which perhaps mechanics devised for concepts for one level of war being misapplied at another level of war. So this was about command control. I need to really know from a designer what they mean by command control at the level of 1, 2, or 3 squads, individual units, units of individual soldiers. When I was a fire team leader, I'm trying to remember. Well, when I was in a fire team, command control was there, but it wasn't separate enough from everything else to be, I guess, independently modeled. That's how I see it. And so to introduce that at this level is like, okay, it might be an interesting game, but it's just going to leave someone with it. I don't know what to say. I value verisimilitude. So that's that.